Joining us now is Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. I gotta call you like Mr. Secretary now after all these years, Wilbur. But you know what? At least you got to get something out of this gig, I think, right?
That's true.
This respect now from Squawk Box, although we're old friends. I read both executive orders for today, and it sounds like they're very similar. I don't know why they're two executive orders, but they're sort of designed to do the same thing, right? Unfair trade in the first one, and then dumping and anti-dumping in the second one. Could you explain the two?
Sure. The first one, it calls for the Commerce Department to conduct a 90-day study, country by country, product by product, of why are we having so much trade deficit with each of those parties. Now, in some cases, it'll be legitimate reasons. For example, we're still not self-sufficient in oil, so obviously we have to bring a lot of oil in from somewhere. But in other cases, it'll be bad practices. It'll be dumping. It will be unfair subsidy of outbound product from other countries to us. It'll be currency misalignment. It will be any of a variety of reasons. So we're going to try to pin down the causes, pinpoint the kinds of responses that might be made, and that will guide trade policy going forward in a very measured, very analytical way. So that's the first order. The second order is about the other half of it. When I first took this job, I was horrified to learn that billions of dollars of duties that have been won after these hard-fought cases have never been collected, something like $3 billion. And the reason is that a lot of times these foreign countries set up straw man importers who really have no financial substance. So when you eventually win the case, there's nobody with resources to go after. What the second order will do is to give us the power to set bonds, namely either letters of credit or insurance company bonds or cash, that those importers will have to put up so that when we do eventually win the case, there's really somebody there who can pay. And those fines will be collected by the Homeland Security through their Customs and Border Patrol.
Yesterday we were having the age-old argument again, Wilbur, about trade deficits, and it was former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers was here. They use just the notion that a trade deficit is a bad thing as a way to impugn whether someone understands trade or not. And I'm sure you still hear this all the time. There are people that argue that a trade deficit is actually a good thing because we're getting more for our stuff than we're actually, I don't know, the more we get from China cheaper, the bigger the trade deficit is. And so it's actually advantageous to have a trade deficit, which, I don't know, I'd still like to export a lot of stuff. But we are a rich country that by definition can buy stuff from everybody else because we consume more because we're able to, because we have the financial wherewithal. Do you ever question whether it's a red herring, the whole trade deficit idea?
Well, if trade deficits are good, why is China so pleased that they run a huge trade surplus? How can it be that both deficits and surpluses are good for your economy? That's the question that I would ask back. And I think it's perfectly obvious that if China hadn't been such a huge net exporter, it never would have grown at the rate that it did. So unless someone can figure out how both surpluses and deficits are each good, right. I feel they're wrong.
It's kind of like, I won't say it. No, it's kind of like, global warming can cause a lot of snow and no snow somehow at the same time. And it is. It's like, I'm not really sure how that necessarily works, but you make a good point. Is it a good thing? I guess it could be nuanced. Maybe for a developing country or, like China, maybe it makes more sense to have the I don't know. I'm sure these guys that take the other stand would have a good answer for you, I think, Wilbur.
Well, whatever their answer is, we are going to work very hard to try to reduce our trade deficit. So assuming we accomplish our purpose, we'll find out soon enough whether or not it's good.
Right. I would like to have so many American, like the president, so many American workers making a great paycheck and making stuff that we, people love Levi's around the world. I wish we could send everything everywhere and make it here. That would be, I can't see how that would be a bad thing.
It wouldn't be a bad thing, and we'll never get quite to that point. But think about it. We have right now 187 trade cases against steel dumping into this country. That's 187 different instances of violations of WTO rules. That's not tolerable. And it surely shows that those people who are dumping, I can promise you, they think that exports are much better than imports.
Secretary Ross, I definitely agree with you that sometimes we've gotten taken advantage of as a nation. But I look at all of these things added up together with these executive orders, when you consider what President Trump was tweeting yesterday about how these negotiations with China are going to be very difficult. When you start looking at things like the border adjustment tax that's been proposed to try and make it a fairer playing field, more level playing field for our manufacturers. And taken in whole, you start to wonder if there will be unintended consequences to all of these, that other nations would not look at that and say, okay, this is a very different environment, and if you do that to us, we're going to do something else to you. That certainly has been one concern, that our trade relationships would be hurt. How would you soothe any of those concerns, and how do we know about the unintended consequences of all these actions?
Well, first of all, I don't believe the administration has endorsed border adjustable taxes. That's a proposal that has come out of House Ways and Means, and we've been studying it very carefully, but I don't believe that either that the president has taken a position on it just yet.
What's your position on that, Mr. Ross?
My position on it is several things. One, there is an inherent unfairness to the way that the value-added tax works for other countries. They get a rebate of it, usually something approaching 20% on their exports. We don't have a value-added tax, and 3 times the WTO has ruled against measures passed by Congress to let our exporters deduct their corporate income taxes on exports when they make the export. That's an inherently unfair anomaly. So something has to be done to fix that one way or the other. As to border adjustable itself, it too is a very complex thing. There are many details of it to be worked out so that it doesn't produce unintended consequences. So as the details unfold, when Ways and Means makes their detailed proposal pretty shortly, then we'll be in a position to analyze it and come to a conclusion.
You heard anything about whether they may go back to, Wilbur, they may go back and try to do Obamacare again to get that $1 trillion to do the tax reform? Do you think that's, McConnell says no, other people say yes? I mean, you walk around there, you listen to what's going on as a fly on the wall. What do you think?
Well, this fly on the wall is mostly focusing on trade as opposed to the health care project. The president has given us quite enough assignments in commerce to try to deal with without grappling with health care.
I want to ask you a philosophical question, and you know, like yesterday when I was, I talked to academics, and they still, I don't know, they still think that a guy like you, that it can't apply to government, which is very weird to me, that things like the innovation in the private sector or the accountability in the private sector, that can't somehow equate. I'll take a business guy any day over an academic or law professor or something like that. But I just conceded, Wilbur, that maybe we need to use pure government money derived from taxes to rebuild our infrastructure.
Well, to me, infrastructure has 3 separate buckets. One is the projects that have very clearly defined, very high quality, long-term sources of revenue from user fees or tolls or what have you. Those are easy to finance. They can do tax-exempt bonds, they can do taxable bonds, they can get private equity funds to give them equity. Those are the easy category.
Okay.
The second category are the ones that have no revenue stream at all.
And we need.
And those are a matter of public policy. Does government wish to finance them?
Yes.
Then you have a third bucket, and those are the ones that have some sort of a revenue stream, but maybe it's a little bit flakier, maybe it's a little bit less certain. To me, those are the ones that are logical for a public-private partnership, because then you'll have private sector equity shielding the risk for the lender and making a rate of return. And we made an example of that actually yesterday. We announced a $56.5 billion project with AT&T to really build a 21st century first responder network throughout the entire country. We put up $6.5 billion through spectrum, unused spectrum that we contributed to the venture. AT&T is putting up $50 billion of actual cash. So we got almost 8 times as much in cash from AT&T for the project as we contributed. That kind of public-private partnership, to me, makes perfect sense. Now, maybe the academics could do better, but I think getting that kind of a ratio is a pretty good job.
Yeah, agreed. We just had Ron Klain on. He pointed out that it's all public-private partnerships, because when the government decides to do something with the tax money, they usually go to the private sector to get whatever it is done. So, you know, there's always the private sector involvement. But then my point is, how do you bring things in under budget? How do you bring things in on time when you're the government? You're controlling the that's where I want the private sector's sort of, and it's really driven by a profit incentive in many times that keeps people worried about what their boss is going to say to them if they're late or if they overcharge or anything like that. And that's what I wish the government, you know, that's where I wish the private sector could ride herd over a lot of the projects. Can that be done?
Well, it is being done. The president created a kind of task force, an advisory committee on infrastructure, consisting of my friend and business partner, Richie Lafrac, and others, in order to provide real input from private sector people who are the world's best developers. Steve Roth is the co-chair with Richie.
Yeah.
Secretary Ross, can I ask you one more question? I'm sorry, I think I cut you off in your answer of my last question. I was so interested in what you said about border adjustment and the administration not taking a stance on that yet. But back to the point of unanticipated consequences, if we are doing things potentially to rile up our trading partners, do you worry about that? Are there any overall effects of the cumulative effect of all of these moves? Do you worry that there will be other nations that take actions up against us?
Well, there are unintended consequences of doing nothing as well. So as to doing something, you have to think about it this way. We are in a trade war. We have been for decades. The only difference is that our troops are finally coming to the ramparts. We didn't end up with a trade deficit accidentally. We ended up in a trade deficit because of the way we negotiated treaties and because of the determination of other countries who don't agree with the academics, who are desperately trying to have a trade surplus with us. The fact is that our trade deficit overall is about $500 billion a year. And quite miraculously, that also equals the net trade surplus of the rest of the world. It's not inherent in free trade that one country has to absorb all the net exports of the rest of the world.
Wilbur Ross, we appreciate your time this morning, Mr. Secretary, and hope to see you again soon. And we're excited. I want to see concrete and cranes, and let's get started. Let's get moving. Let's break some ground. Let's break some ground somewhere. You've done it, and you got a builder as a president. Should be easy.
Well, we're going to try to break ground without breaking glass.
Or breaking wind, which nobody needs. Anyway, thank you. Thank you, Wilbur.
Okay.
All right.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.